Shane was a regular kid. He lived life to the fullest. If there was a tree to be climbed, he climbed it. If there was an ocean to surf, he dove in. If there was a friend to be made, he made friends.
I met Shane in preschool. I remember just running around in circles and screaming with him.
I met Shane in kindergarten. We became immediate friends.
I first met Shane in kindergarten at BRS. We had this made-up game.
Temples of Doom, from what I can remember, was kind of like an imaginary, level-based game.
That it was kind of like a video game.
And we would battle different things from our imagination, like, oh, Anubis is over there. And I'd be like, Shane, use your Rasengan, because that's like a move Naruto would use in his show. And he would have that ability, and I would have Goku's Kamehameha or whatever. And that's what we would use to fight the main boss.
We played it for years in elementary school, and then we finally beat the game.
We were really, really little. There was a chair, and with my grandpa Rob, well, the chair was very special to him, and we were in the chair, and he was telling us to get out. We didn't get out, and we were real bastards.
As silly and ridiculous as he was with his friends, he was equally at ease talking with adults. I would even call him a witty kid. When Shane was 7 years old, we visited the Museum of Natural History in New York. I noticed Shane was stuffing his pants pockets with brochures. "Why are you doing that?" I asked. And he answered, "So if somebody tries to mug me, all he'll get is a bunch of worthless paper." Shane was an affectionate kid. He would willingly hug any relative at the drop of a hat. One of the best experiences of his childhood was taking karate lessons. After 5 years of hard work, punching, kicking, doing all the acts of kindness, he achieved his junior black belt, and we were so proud of him. This was definitely one of the high points of Shane's childhood. I think Shane was about 14 when I noticed a change in his personality. He became more withdrawn, didn't have the zest for life that he always had.
He was definitely quieter, but like a lot of times he's more tired.
Yeah, in the last 6 days, I've got a total of about 8 hours of sleep, and it's not good.
I would ask him if there was anything wrong, and he would say, "Nope, there's nothing wrong." My mother's intuition told me that there was something wrong. But if he said there wasn't, then who was I to argue with him? He started spending a lot of time in a friend's garage. He was there for hours and hours. I couldn't imagine what he was doing there all that time.
He used to come here and just play the drums. Like you can wait upstairs, I'm just gonna be messing up and all that stuff, but
I liked the fact that he was hanging out with friends rather than being holed up in his room by himself.
This was our clubhouse, We'd have poker nights. He had the knowledge of poker, and none of us knew how to play. He would get so mad at us because we just never grasped the concept.
Halfway through his sophomore year of high school, it was clear that there was something wrong. He'd always been a good student, but since the beginning of high school, his grades had been steadily dropping. We noticed that there was often a pack of cigarettes sticking out of his jeans pocket. And we're like, "Hey, what's going on? Are you smoking?" No, I'm just holding those for a friend." One day, we sat him down. We were gonna ask him, about his doing poorly in school and about his smoking. We said, "You can tell us anything, Shane. We won't be mad at you." He took a long pause. Finally, he said, I knew better than to ask him why he was depressed. Because you can be smart, talented, have loving friends and family, and still be depressed. Some people's brains are just wired that way. My heart went out to Shane, but I can't say I was too surprised because it explained, his behavior for the last year and a half. So now that we knew Shane's problem, all we had to do was get him some help. First thing I did was I talked to the school psychiatrist, and she recommended that he see a social worker, who was this lady who worked out of an office in Pleasantville and helped other teens. So he did start talking to this woman. And a few months went by, but he didn't seem to be getting any better. So Matt and I thought, well, maybe he needed to get on some kind of an antidepressant. A friend recommended a psychiatrist. She did prescribe a low-dose antidepressant for him and also a prescription for Xanax. But the Xanax were only to be used in case he had an anxiety attack. We bought a little safe and we kept all the medications locked up. Summer of 2013 arrived. The stress of getting up early for school and studying for exams was off, for a little while anyway. Shane earned his driver's license and hung out with his girlfriend a lot that summer. Matt and I continued to worry about his emotional state. He just didn't seem to be getting any better. And he kept asking for that Xanax, way more than we thought was a good idea. Shane went back to school in September, but his junior year didn't bring the fresh start we had hoped for. Some days it was impossible to get Shane up for school. He had been having problems with insomnia for the last couple of years, so at the beginning we just chalked it up to that.
It's like 2 a.m. I have no idea how late it is, but it's fucking late.
Some teachers came to me and said he was falling asleep in class. We constantly had to push and nag him to do his work. He was so intelligent that he could still get an A without having to try.
Sophomore year, we had this teacher who was just dumb. This guy was so dumb he couldn't figure out how to put a test together. So he hands us this test one day, and it starts with question 20, and it skips questions, and then it goes backwards, and question 1 is on page 3, and he spends the first 15 minutes of class explaining how to take this test. Halfway through, Shane stands up, hands in the completed test, and leaves. Got a 96 on it without knowing how to take the test.
We worried so much about our son. One day, I happened to see him as he got out of the bathroom after a shower. He had a towel wrapped around his waist, and I noticed that his ribs were sticking out. He was really, really thin. And I knew that we were all eating dinner together every night because that was one thing that I insisted on. As far as the rest of the day went, I had no idea what he was eating. He might have been surviving on coffee and cigarettes for all I knew. One evening, Shane walked into the house and sank down onto the living room couch. I happened to notice he had some sort of a glazed look in his eyes. Now, recently, the youth officer from the Pleasantville Police Department had come to the high school to give a talk to the students about, kind of a say no to drugs kind of a thing. The talk took place in the library, and so I was there for the whole thing. And one thing that stuck out from the presentation was that not only were kids getting into all the usual things like alcohol, marijuana, but that a lot of kids were starting to use heroin in our area, which came as a shock to me. I did not know that. So here was Shane passing out on the couch, and the youth officer's presentation came back to me. And a chill went through me at that point because it suddenly popped into my head that maybe Shane was doing drugs. So I asked him point blank, and he of course denied it. I grabbed a flashlight, I'm prying open his eyes, I'm peering in there with the flashlight. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Were the pupils supposed to be dilated or pinpoint? He pushed the flashlight away, and he's kind of dropping off to sleep and goes, dropped off to sleep. I immediately got on the phone with Matt, told him what was going on with Shane, told him all of my worries. He called back later, spoke with Shane. Shane, of course, denied using drugs again. And Matt said, listen, we can find out easily by taking a sample of your hair and getting it tested for drugs. So that's when Shane broke down at that point and admitted that he was using oxycodone. Now we knew that the psychiatrist wasn't helping, the antidepressants weren't helping, and that in order to deal with his pain, he had turned to opiates. All of a sudden, Matt and I were totally alone in the world, because who could we ask for help? We couldn't ask our doctor, we couldn't ask our friends, our family. Our son had a drug problem. Now what do we do? His psychiatrist told us to take him to the Phelps Hospital Outpatient Drug Treatment Center in Ossining. So we started taking him there, and he would have meetings and they would do the drug testing there. And in addition to them testing him, we also bought drug testing kits from the internet and tested him ourselves. But one mistake we made was that we were only testing him for one drug, the oxycodone. For the next 3 months, we did everything we were supposed to do, and nothing changed. He was still eating poorly, he was still depressed, he was still not doing his work, he was just watching TV, hanging around with friends, just not doing anything productive. He also was on the probation list at school, which meant that he was failing 2 or more classes. One afternoon, instead of doing all the work that had been piling up, he took off with a friend for the mall. I'm really a non-confrontational person. I never yelled at Shane, I never threatened him, I always supported him, I always told him I loved him, and no matter what he was doing, no matter how he was messing up. But, you know, it was just, we were trying to do our best for him and nothing seemed to be working. And it just seemed like that day I just came to my breaking point. So I just got on the phone with him and I was like, what the hell are you going to the mall for? You got all this work, blah, blah, blah. And I remember the exact words I said. I remember saying to him, don't you care about anything at all? Matt and I agreed it was time to have another family talk. So it was a Saturday in March 2014. We were all sitting in the living room and we wanted to know why Shane wasn't doing any work, whether he wanted to just drop out of school, you know, because it was just seeming like a waste of time. Matt and I kind of got through with everything that we had to say. And we just sort of sat there waiting for Shane to respond. And it seemed like a long time went by. And I remember Shane put his head in his hands, and then he slowly raised his head up. And he said, and of course, I immediately thought I was going to throw up because this was just the worst thing I could possibly imagine. I mean, heroin. What could be worse? We all cried and hugged, and then when we finally pulled ourselves together, Matt got on the phone trying to look for a rehab facility in our area. I believe there were only 2 rehab centers in our immediate area that accepted people under the age of 18. And the one facility that Matt contacted was up in Carmel, New York, and they're called Arms Acres. And they did say that they could accommodate Shane on that Monday, so bring him on up. We drove up to Arms Acres and sat in the waiting room for hours. Finally, they were ready to admit Shane. He went through the doors and we said goodbye. Tuesday, I went back to work at the high school where I worked in the library, and I felt that I had to tell like a big fat lie about where Shane was, because Shane was going to be absent for we didn't know how long. So I sort of made up something about him falling off the skateboard and getting a concussion. I was just too mortified to have to tell them the truth. Couldn't. The house did feel empty and quiet without him. Somehow the 3 weeks crawled by. And after the 3 weeks, they said, okay, he'll be able to go home again. So we jumped back in the car, came back up to Arms Acres, and he came out and we were just thrilled to see him. He looked great. He was smiling. He looked healthier than he had looked for months. Before we left the facility, his caseworker gave us a whole bunch of medicine for him and said he hoped to never see Shane there again. Now Shane was sober, and our job was to keep him that way. He went back to school and had really his work cut out for him trying to catch up with everything he had missed. Not only did he have regular old schoolwork, he also had to see a nurse practitioner to manage his medication, and he had to see a therapist, and we had to try to bring him to as many Narcotics Anonymous meetings as we could get him to. I know staying sober was a daily struggle for Shane. He thought about drugs constantly. He could not push it out of his mind. We would drug test him often. This time we were using a 12-panel drug test, testing for all different kinds of drugs. We didn't let him have any money. We didn't let him have the car. He had a curfew of 8 p.m. It felt terrible to treat him this way. It felt terrible to have to say no to him all the time. But I just had to keep reminding myself that we were trying to save his life. The irony of us enforcing all these rules on him was that, as he said to us, he stayed sober for the rest of his junior year. At the end of the year, his Spanish teacher assigned a project where you had to make a video, and it could be about anything you wanted as long as it was in Spanish. So Shane partnered up with a friend of his named Julian.
We were assigned to make a movie in Spanish. It had to be 20 to 30 minutes long, which was a very long time, in a language that we didn't speak so well.
Yo voy a matar una persona si ellos no más atrás.
La significa de la manzana, the meaning of the apple. Shane was a really big fan of Quentin Tarantino, and he wanted to base our Apple Thievery movie on Reservoir Dogs. Like, he could think out how a complex scene should be filmed, but the way he would think it out is he would just lay down on the floor and put his hands on his forehead and just think it, and then he would be like, I've got it. And then he would stand up and like tell everyone where they had to stand.
Don't let me down, all right?
And I really like those memories.
Shane completed his junior year and passed all his classes. During the summer, he played music with his friends. We did family stuff. He worked at the farmer's market. He would be responsible for setting up the sound equipment because they had musical acts there. The drug tests we did on Shane kept coming up negative, and every time they came up negative, I would celebrate a little bit. I would think that maybe we were succeeding in getting Shane clean. Maybe we were saving his life. Maybe he would turn out to be healthy and happy after all. Deep down, I knew I was being too optimistic. I just had a feeling that he wasn't getting any better, despite taking the antidepressants and seeing the therapist, etc. I would ask him, are you feeling any better? And he would say, yeah, a little bit. But I knew really that he was just telling me that because he didn't want me to worry. 4 sober months turned into 5 sober months, and we started to relax our rules a little bit. We would let him have the car, and we would let him go play music with his friends because we knew that that was very, very important to him. And the other thing we did was we let him get a job at this restaurant in town. And since we knew that that was a little bit risky, we would bring him to his shift and we would pick him up from his shift. And sometimes we would even just pop in the middle of his shift to make sure that he was really there. We thought we were watching him pretty darn closely, but I think we were actually being a little naive. Shane's 5-month clean record was broken on a sunny September morning. We were going apple picking as a family, which we always loved to do. We were in the apple orchard and Shane pulled out his phone to take a picture of Matt. So Matt's looking at Shane's phone and he sees that the lens was blocked by something. And he goes, "Shane, let me see your phone for a second." So he takes the phone and removes the cover off of it. As he did so, this little bag floated down to the ground. Sure enough, it was a little bag of drugs that he had figured out a very clever way to hide it inside of his phone. So it seemed like we were back to square one and we were having our hearts broken all over again. During the next few months, which was the beginning of Shane's senior year of high school, he would go a few weeks with a clean drug test, and then he would test positive for oxy. Then he would go another few weeks, and then he would test positive again, up and down. During the last week of January 2015, we searched his room and we found like a whole bunch of empty wine bottles in there. Worse than the wine bottles, in his little trash can in his room, we found all the pills that he was supposed to have been taking to curb his cravings for heroin. Now this came as a complete shock to me because I would give him the pill every night and I would watch him take the pill, put it in his mouth, and he would swallow. But I guess he must have just been pretending to swallow, put it under his tongue or something. And then when I was out of sight, he would remove it and throw it away. Obviously, the recovery was not going well. We had to come up with a new plan. The nurse practitioner mentioned there was a long-acting drug that could be given as an injection that would stop Shane's cravings for heroin. We decided we would make Shane an appointment and have her administer that drug. The appointment was going to be for Saturday, January 31st. January 30th was a Friday. Shane was scheduled to work the dinner shift at MacArthur's. After his shift was over, he asked if he could hang out with some friends. We said okay, and he borrowed the car, told them he'd be back at midnight, and he was back at midnight. We were still up, of course, so we all kind of said goodnight. Everybody went to bed. I woke up at a bit after 8 on Saturday morning, and our cat was sitting right next to my head, right next to my pillow. And it seemed like she was looking out the window. So I looked to see where she was looking. And Shane's bedroom window was diagonally across from ours, one of our windows. And I saw that he was hanging out the window, face down. And that did not look right to me. And I was just jumped up from the bed, wide awake, and I was just thinking to myself, let him be asleep, let him be asleep, let him be asleep. And I ran into the room and grabbed him, wake up, Shane, wake up. And he wasn't waking up, but he felt warm to me, so I was just hoping and praying. I just screamed to Matt, Shane won't wake up. And he jumped out of bed, threw his boots on. This is the middle of winter. And meanwhile, I ran to call 911. So I'm talking to 911. Matt ran around to check on Shane. And like half a minute later, he's back in the house. He literally fell on the floor and said, he's gone. When Shane was really little, we had no inkling that he would ever have a gift for making music. We used to listen to Disney songs or VeggieTales or the theme from Pokemon, and Shane would try to sing along, and I would notice that he would be out of tune. And I remember thinking, well, I guess music's not going to be his thing. At the same time Shane and I were singing to the Bare Necessities from Jungle Book, Matt's music was just playing in the house.
So when Shane was 5, he wanted to know what the turntable was. We had a turntable hooked up into our sound system. So I thought I would demonstrate for him. So I got some of my old vinyl records out and I played one, the Ramones, and Shane really liked it, just responded to it instantly. And that was really the first moment when he sort of got interested in rock and roll.
Matt had an acoustic guitar that he used for playing Hank Williams songs every now and then.
He said he was interested in the guitar. The acoustic guitar was too big for him. It was too big for his hands to play, but I had the little electric guitar. He started playing that little electric guitar. I taught him the basic chords. So Shane had the little junky guitar that I gave him, but he wanted an amp. And so I said, well, if you want an amplifier, you're going to have to earn it. So I assigned him a chord progression, a fairly simple thing. And I said, if you learn this and can play it back to me successfully, we'll go get an amp. And took a day or two and figured out the chord progression, was able to play it back, so got him an amp. Well, he was outpacing me when he was 8 or 9 years old. He just had this uncanny understanding of it that was actually, a little spooky, frankly. There was one time when I was out on the couch and I was hacking my way through this Cowboy Junkies songs, playing open chords, and Shane from all the way down the hall in his bedroom heard it. And he came running in and he said, Dad, you can play that same song with bar chords. And he took the guitar from me and he just played it back without me even telling him what the chords are. I was frankly blown away.
So it was looking like Shane loved playing the guitar and was actually pretty good at it. Before long, he started asking us for his own electric guitar. One day we took him to the Sam Ash store and let him check out all the guitars and play any one that he liked. He selected a red Ibanez. After a few months of saving, we bought the Ibanez, and Shane had his first electric guitar. Now that he had his very own guitar, he began playing, learning, and practicing in earnest.
He would go online to YouTube and he would look at videos of people teaching him how to do it. And I remember there was this little Scottish kid who did a tutorial on Crazy Train.
It was natural that Shane would want to discover his own music, not just listen to what his parents did. Shane's musical taste leaned towards some pretty heavy stuff. Screamo, metalcore, death metal, blackened death metal. To many people it just sounds like noise. But if you really listen, it turns out that the musicianship in many of these bands is extraordinary. Guitarist fingers fly over the frets at dizzying speeds. And I should know, because like the good rock and roll mom I was, I chaperoned Shane to many of these scream fests. Shane taught himself how to play these bands' music by using tabs he got from the internet. I have no idea how these tabs work, but somehow they tell you how to play any song.
I'm going to be doing a cover of The Last Fight by Bullet for My Valentine.
During the summers before 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, he signed him up for Chappaqua Rocks. This was a camp where all sorts of kids who wanted to play rock music, regardless of their ability, could go to learn and play in real bands with their peers.
I think I was in a few bands with him. And he was always really talented, and he was always playing something that sounded really hard to play. And he's very much a perfectionist.
At the end of each week, a concert was given for parents and friends. After meeting at Chappaqua Rocks, Shane and his friend David immersed themselves in electronic dance music. They would write music on their own. Shane used a program called Reason, then share it and critique each other's compositions. They got into EDM at the very peak of the dubstep craze. Shane's love of EDM had an ironic slant.
My plan is to become the most successful music producer in the whole entire world, and just by making crappy rap beats.
Ironic or not, he seemed to have a lot of fun with it. You remember Shane's metal phase? He grew out of that. In high school, he began to listen to indie bands like Modest Mouse and Neutral Milk Hotel, and folk artists like Ray LaMontagne and the Mountain Goats. But his all-time favorite artist was a guy called Conor Oberst, a singer-songwriter who was the front man of the band Bright Eyes.
Well, Shane introduced me to a lot of music, and we used to have a tradition of giving each other mixtapes with notes on them and lots of songs. And all the music today that I've branched into and still listen to is because of Shane.
I think Shane's depression directly influenced his change in musical taste. He was drawn to the slower tempo and emotional content of the lyrics. To put it simply, because Shane was sad, he wanted to listen to sad music.
The ocean never comes.
Music really had become Shane's life. The kids that he had been friends with when he was younger were now more interested in playing sports and video games. He craved the companionship of people who shared his passion for music, especially other musicians. He started talking about this place he had heard of in the next town over called The Garage. This place was apparently a magnet for kids who wanted to play music.
It just was like a wild, crazy idea one of us threw out that Drew had a garage that was just full of garbage, so we came up with the idea to make it into a place to hang out. And then I think it was later that week we just started throwing things away.
I finally called up my buddy Paul, and I had known Mike, who was another Pleasantville guy, and some other people in that area like Nick, and so I called Paul, and we piled all them into the garage, and both Mike and Nick played drums and Mike played guitar. So we just sort of started building this group of people that could all play music, and from there it really just got wider and wider.
Yeah, the word got out. I don't know, I guess it was a breath of fresh air for a lot of people. Just this place you could just hang out.
Yeah.
There's always music being played.
Right.
People would come and paint. It was pretty much like an anarchist community center.
Shane was dying to join this crowd. A chance meeting finally brought Danny and Shane together.
So I ran out of the music room in a rage and bumped into Shane. I don't know if we may have physically bumped into each other. I guess I convinced him to come talk to me in the woods or up the hill away from people. And we started talking and found out we have a lot of same music interests, tastes like the same type of music, which was cool.
And finally, we just started talking, you know, about music, and we just sort of, you know, geeked out together. Relentlessly made fun of him for listening to Cannibal Corpse, and you know, in a joking way, you know, he made fun of me for listening to Fish.
After Shane found his tribe, he spent a lot of time at the garage. He would just jam with whoever happened to be there.
I had a mandolin, he had a banjo, we could both play bass. So we just started like getting together and playing all sorts of, you know, folk tunes and rock, and, you know, doing that whole thing. I was like, damn, this cat, he knows what he's doing, you know?
He would join with other kids to form a band that would play at some kid's party. Then that group of kids would dissolve and another mix of kids would come together to play at a talent show at the school. As long as it involved music, Shane wanted to be there. The next logical step was for Shane to start writing songs.
So we started playing, and then 2 weeks later we were writing, and 2 weeks later we were recording. Yeah. Bang, bang, bang.
So this is a song Shane and I wrote together. I had this little thing. And I brought that to him, and we sat down and wrote some lyrics together. Riders come and go like these little broken towns. Rails staked into the earth, take me where I'm bound. When I arrive, I don't know if I will really have been found.
During the months of his heaviest addiction, he didn't write any music. His brain and body were just too hampered by drugs. When he came out of rehab, he got right back into it. I remember him telling me about how much he had accomplished and how happy he was to be able to concentrate on his craft. Shane published his first EP, Common Burn, on Bandcamp in May 2014. He published another couple of songs in June because, as he said in his modest way,
For a younger, you know, he was still in high school, he was way ahead of his time.
Somehow I still made out the shape of your pupils from your shimmering lips or uncut hair. So go right ahead and take your picture, darling. Pick a point to make me look good. Try to take it from an angle that makes me look sober, even though I'm not as well understood.
the last thing Shane published was a collection of 3 covers and 3 originals, which he recorded in his uncle's barn in Virginia in December of 2014. He called it the Barn EP.
And I wanna drink a Pepsi with God while he's pushing the sun toward West Virginia. He told me soon enough he'd be flying down some highway, thinking he'd never see me morning again. Home was where I only slept and washed my hair, but after work lets out, I'm coming right there. I'm gonna look straight into your bloodshot eyes. I'm gonna try my hardest just to treat you right. But you throw the door open from the back of our house and you scream at me to take the garbage out. Driving down the parkway in between the trees and they're overgrown, unlike your love for me. on your worn out leather coat. Pour some coffee for the road. I'm sad that you're leaving. 611 Easton.
Now you know almost everything there is to know about Shane. He had a lot to give. And he was loved. If only he had loved himself as much as everybody else did.